Chapter 53. One Man's Sin. The thundering collapse of the walls of Jericho was not a great surprise to the Israelites. They had been told by God, through Joshua, what to do and what would happen. Even so, it was a chilling experience to witness the end of thousands as they tumbled with the collapsing walls. Joshua chapter 6, verses 16 through 20. The Israelite soldiers knew what to do at that point. They broke from their ranks and rushed into the spreading clouds of dust, scrambling over the rubble in a tightening circle to hem in all the Canaanites who didn't perish in the collapse of the walls. The Israelites swiftly obeyed the strict order to end every human being and animal in the city. Only one family spared. The only people spared were Rahab, the inn owner, and her close relatives. Because Rahab had determined to quit serving pagan gods and learn to obey the one true God, and had acted upon her newfound faith, God has listed her in the 8th chapter of the New Testament among those who trusted in God and are promised a better resurrection. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 31 and 35. Rahab and her relatives were in the inn at the time of Jericho's fall, and though the inn was built upon the wall, that particular portion of the wall was miraculously spared. A group of soldiers, led by the 2 scouts who had previously visited Rahab and had promised her the protection, went up inside the piece of the wall and brought Rahab, those related to her, and her possessions to a safe place outside Israel's camp. The account of the perishing of the idolatrous inhabitants of Jericho by God's command is an episode among many others that various religious leaders in high offices declare should be removed from the Bible. They feel that God used poor judgment in allowing such accounts to be written into the scriptures. But in reality, when God had these wretched idolaters destroyed, He was actually granting them mercy. In the judgment, they and other ignorant idolaters will be resurrected and given an opportunity to learn God's way to peace and happiness. Matthew chapter 12, verse 41 and verse 42, Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 12, and Isaiah chapter 65, verses 19 through 25. The Israelites had already been warned not to take any treasure of any kind from Jericho, except articles of gold, silver, brass, and iron, which were to go into God's treasury. Everything else and everyone in Jericho was cursed, but the items made of these materials could later be purified by fire. These things were carefully sought out and set aside to later go into the treasury of God's sanctuary. No one was to keep any of these things for himself, nor was anyone to take for himself things such as clothes, food, precious stones, animals, and so forth. Any person who took any personal treasure was to become cursed by God, and would bring a curse upon Israel, that all would suffer. Joshua chapter 6, verses 17 through 19. After the metals had been removed, the Israelites set fire to the ruins of Jericho. Although most of the walls and many of the buildings had been built of stone and bricks, a great part of the city was made of heavy wooden beams, poles, planks, and boards. There were other flammable materials, but the wood alone was enough to produce a tremendous fire in which the dead Canaanites were partly cremated. As for that standing portion of the wall on which Rahab's inn was located, it too came crashing down when the wooden beams supporting her house were burned up. By now the darkness had come on. Carrying all the metal and gold they could find, the Israelites turned from the blazing ruins and returned to camp. Next morning, Joshua called a meeting of the elders and officers. Jericho's desolation, a memorial. Pass on the word to all the people, Joshua informed them, that no man should ever rebuild Jericho. It could present a strong temptation, what with the great wall stones and wells remaining in this area. Anyone who reconstructs this city will fall under a curse from God, and he will become childless. His oldest child shall die when he lays the foundation, and his youngest child shall die when he sets up the city gates. Let the ashes and stones of Jericho be a monument to the destruction that will come to all idol worshippers. This prophecy was fulfilled about 500 years later when a very foolish Israelite rebuilt the city of Jericho. Read 1 Kings chapter 16 verse 34. News of the fall of Jericho spread swiftly over the land, and Joshua became famous in that part of the world because of his leading Israel to take over such a strong city. Consequently, the fear of Israel mounted in the surrounding nations. Joshua chapter 6 verse 27. The next city Joshua intended to conquer was called Ai. It was about 12 miles from Jericho in a westerly direction. And though it was considerably smaller than the destroyed city, Joshua had no intention to bypass any fortress that might later prove a source of trouble. Again, scouts were used to obtain information. When they returned from the fortress of Ai, they reported that this Amorite fortress was not very large or very strong, and that it would be no great problem for Israel to attack and destroy it. It won't be necessary for all or even most of our army to attack this place, the scouts reported to Joshua. The walls aren't very high, and it is too small to contain very many fighting men. 2,000 or 3,000 of our soldiers should be able to conquer it. Joshua chapter 7 verses 2 and 3. At first, it seemed to Joshua that it would be risky to send such a small number of soldiers. But then he began to wonder if he would be showing a lack of faith in what God could do for Israel by sending 10 or 20 times as many men as the scouts suggested. After all, the scouts he sent were chosen from among his best, and were men of good judgment. Joshua concluded that it would not be necessary to send more than 3,000 men. A few hours later, the Israelite soldiers emerged from the caravan road leading up from the Jordan Valley. They saw the city of Ai atop a ridge. It was evident that they could be plainly seen by the Amorite defenders and that a surprise attack would be impossible. Nevertheless, the Israelite soldiers were confident because of what God had done for them at Jericho, and they marched boldly up to Ai's walls. Their leader was certain that the Amorites would surrender when they were told to give up without a fight, or be set upon by the entire Israelite army. Tragedy at Ai. Suddenly the gate of Ai swung open, and thousands of screaming Amorite soldiers rushed out at their would-be attackers. The Israelites had supposed that the inhabitants of Ai would be quaking with fear, and this abrupt turn of events surprised the Israelites that they momentarily froze in their tracks. By the time they got into action, spears and arrows from the onrushing Amorites were raining onto the ranks of the Israelites, and some of these weapons were finding fatal marks. On top of that, large rock catapults atop the wall had gone into operation, and huge boulders were thudding amongst the Israelite men. "Where is the help and defense God promised us?" was the question that crossed the minds of most of the Israelite soldiers. It was being made shamefully obvious to the Israelites that God's protection, since the crossing of the Jordan, hinged upon their obedience. Faith in their Creator swiftly fled, and so did the Israelites. Instead of fighting back, they turned and raced away through the hail of stones, arrows, and spears. This cowardly move spurred the screaming Amorites to greater boldness, and they pursued their enemies all the way back to the road by which the Israelites had come from. When at last the routed and panic-stricken Israelites were clear of their pursuers and could group back together safely, they found that the Amorites had slain 36 of their soldiers and had wounded many more. It was a dejected and disgraced piece of army that returned to the Israelite camps. When the people heard what had happened, their confidence in God tumbled to a new low. They could not understand why God would promise them swift victory over all their enemies, and then allow about 3,000 of their soldiers to be disorganized, chased, and crippled by the idol-worshipping Amorites. Joshua chapter 7 verses 4 and 5. In those days it was the custom to show regret, self-loathing, or humiliation by tearing one's clothes and tossing dust upon his head. That was what Joshua did when he heard the news. He was so upset and discouraged that he called the elders together before the tabernacle to join him until sundown in prostrated position and an attitude of repentance to God. "Oh, why have you brought us over the Jordan to let us fall into the hands of the Amorites?" Joshua inquired of God as he lay with his face to the ground inside the tabernacle. "It would have been better for us to stay on the east side of the river than try to attack our enemies here and end up fleeing in terror from them. When all the Canaanites and other nations hear of this, they shall decide that we are really weak, and shall come with their combined forces to surround us. We shall be destroyed, and the great name of our God shall be disgraced." "These things haven't happened because of any unfaithfulness on my part," God replied to Joshua. "My orders were that no treasures should be taken from Jericho for personal gain. I warned Israel that anyone who did so would become as accursed as Jericho's people, and that a curse would fall on all Israel as a result. Someone has gone against my will in this matter, and a curse has fallen on this nation. That is why the attempt to conquer Ai was a failure. My help and strength was not with your soldiers, nor will my help be with Israel again in any attempt to overcome your enemies, until you remove and destroy the guilty one." Joshua was surprised and shocked when he heard this. It had not occurred to him that the defeat of his soldiers could be due to someone obtaining treasure from Jericho and hiding it. "Get up and tell the people what has happened," God continued. "Tell them that they cannot successfully face their enemies until the guilty one is removed, and that they should wash themselves and be ready to appear before you tomorrow while the guilty one is found." Joshua obeyed, and the next morning the heads of the tribes gathered before the tabernacle and drew lots to learn what tribe had the guilty person. The tribe of Judah drew the telling lot. Then it was up to the heads of the families of Judah to draw lots. The head of the family of the Zarhites drew the unwanted lot. And next it was the turn of the household heads of the Zarhites to draw lots. According to the manner in which God caused the lots to be drawn, the household turned out to be that of Zabdi. The men of the household of Zabdi solemnly gathered together to do their part. The vast crowd of silent onlookers knew that one of these men was responsible for the death of 36 soldiers, and injury of many others, and the humiliating retreat of the Israelites from Ai. The guilty man found. The lot indicating guilt was drawn by a man by the name of Achan, referred to in other scriptures as Achan, 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 7. Long before the lot was drawn, it was evident to many bystanders that this was the man being sought. His face grew more concerned, and his expression more fearful as the matters moved forward. The pale and shaking Achan was brought before Joshua. "Don't try to hide your evil deed," Joshua advised him. "Honor your God by confessing what you have done." I didn't realize at the time how much I was sinning against the God of Israel." Achan tearfully burst out as he fell to his knees and bowed his head. "I was rummaging through the rubble of Jericho with the other soldiers, when I stumbled by myself into the remains of what surely had been the dwelling quarters of a wealthy merchant. When I looked around and saw many valuable things that could increase my family's living standard, I didn't think it would greatly matter to take some of them, especially because most of them would be burned and wasted. One of the things that caught my eye was a beautiful Babylonian robe that looked as if it was woven of golden threads from a rainbow. I stuffed the robe under my jacket and I scooped up a handful of coins from a chest. I grabbed some small object that looked as though it was solid gold. I put these things into my pouch and climbed out of the place to rejoin my men." Joshua chapter 7, verses 19 through 21. "And where are these things now, Achan?" Joshua queried. I buried them in the ground inside my tent," was the painful reply. Joshua immediately rushed officers to Achan's tent, and they returned within a few minutes to show Joshua a very costly Babylonian robe, a number of silver coins, and a small wedge-shaped bar of gold. Joshua was aware of the unpleasant event that had to follow this admission of guilt. According to God's orders, Achan and his family, his livestock, his possessions, including the things he had stolen, were to be taken to a spot well outside the camp of Israel. There Joshua again confronted Achan to ask him why he had been so thoughtless and disobedient as to bring so much trouble on his people. "I didn't mean to bring on what happened," Achan murmured through tears. "I just didn't take God's warning seriously concerning how much one person's sin can affect the others." Those were Achan's last words, and he was led away to be stoned to death in the sight of his family and thousands of others. Then his corpse and his possessions were burned, and a great pile of stones was heaped upon his remains. Since he had tried to enrich his family by rebelling against God, his family had to stand by and watch as all their property was destroyed, as a warning to everyone. Joshua chapter 7, verses 22 through 26. Joshua returned to the tabernacle to humbly ask God to be merciful to the Israelites and strengthen them against their enemies. "Don't be discouraged," God told Joshua. "Now that the accursed man has been removed, I have removed my curse and my anger. Now take the army and go to the city of Ai. Use some of your men to bait the Amorites into coming out. Hide the greater part of your army so that they can surprise the enemy. Then you will see how I shall deliver Ai and all its people to you." Joshua chapter 8, verses 1 and 2.